We are back from summer vacations and are thinking now about the Eurozone economy and the EU and the global economy. I'm here today with our visiting fellow Karen Wilson. So we are back from summer vacation, but Europe is still in a bad state. Unemployment is very high, in some countries well above 20%. Only German unemployment is pretty low, actually at a historic low. But for the rest of the Eurozone, unemployment and the EU unemployment is high and actually is not declining. So the big question is, what can be done to reduce employment and trigger more growth? We have Bruegel, of course, have worked a lot on the issue of reducing the fragmentation of the financial system through a banking union. We have talked about and worked on fiscal union. And we are thinking a lot about the structural factors that really drive long-term unemployment and weak growth in Europe. So today I want to discuss with Karen what are other measures that could be taken in order to reduce unemployment, such as venture capital, entrepreneurship, and innovation.
So in Europe, we need to find new ways to unleash entrepreneurship and innovation. And I think one of the places that we really need to start is by changing mindsets. Changing mindsets from trying to find a job to actually trying to create a job, and being proactive and finding ways to create new jobs, become entrepreneurs, be a more entrepreneurial society. So it's not just about individuals, it's about firms, it's about governments, and also in academia, frankly. We need a much more entrepreneurial mindset, being willing to take more risks in Europe, because the facts are, as you said at the beginning, we're in a dire situation in Europe. Things are not looking up. The world has changed. Budgets are tight. There are less and less jobs, existing jobs, and that will continue. So unless we find a way for more people to become entrepreneurs and take their own future into their hands and create their own jobs, it's going to be very hard to get out of this. Of course, there are many different types of entrepreneurship. There are people that might set up a small firm, become self-employed. That's fine. But if we really want job creation and economic growth, we also need people that are willing to create high-growth firms, these riskier ventures, technology-backed ventures. And so we need to encourage people to take the risk, to go out and be willing to try to create these new ventures. We also have to make sure that they have the skills. Less and less young people today are willing to study science, technology, engineering, and math. And without people, without those strong technical skills, it's then hard to build a pipeline of these high-growth firms. So we need to start at an early age, make sure young people are getting the kind of training they need for creating future jobs, and also that they're exposed to entrepreneurship from the time they're young throughout their educational career, and that they realize that that's something that they can do, that they don't just have to go work in a big company or become a public servant. There are other options out there. They can take their future into their hands. Probably the jobs of the future are going to be very different, and they're going to change over time. So people need to have the skills to be able to shift and move and change and grow over time. And I think also lifelong learning is probably going to become more important. But in terms of these high-growth firms, I think there are a number of things that governments can do to help create the right environment. One is to make sure that the framework conditions are conducive for high-growth firms. That's things like employment legislation, bankruptcy law. There's a real fear of failure in Europe, and actually there's a real penalty in some countries if you fail. So these types of things need to be addressed. Other regulations also can sometimes get in the way. Even regulations that might be meant to help entrepreneurship might have some adverse effects. So I think it's important to look at regulations and make sure that they're freed up to unleash as much entrepreneurship as possible. Then things like working on changing the culture and education, as I mentioned before, and having role models of people that have gone and done this and been successful, and not just the Richard Bransons, the big names, but but also people locally, so that people can be encouraged and find help in how to get started. And then, of course, financing is very important. Angel investment, venture capital, the type of financing that usually supports these high growth firms.
Karen, you mentioned of course, the access to finance and the need to get angel investors, capital at an early stage of the firm lives, but also, of course, finance in general. And of course, one of the big problems we are having at the moment is the lack of credit, the lack of finance. But of course, it is also a problem that we don't get the same extent of equity finance in Europe compared to other places in the world. Equity finance, it seems to me, is the right way of financing high growth potential firms that have a lot of risk, but that can also really grow really quickly. And here, I think in Europe, we still have quite an underdeveloped infrastructure for such equity markets. So I think this is some avenue that should be pursued. I mean, we cannot just rely on bank-based credit, financial intermediation. We need to think about equity markets also to promote growth more broadly.
Yes, and the other thing about angel investment in venture capital, it's not just money, it's also expertise. Angel investors are former entrepreneurs that have been successful in their companies, made some money, and they want to give back. They want to work with other entrepreneurs and help them build their business. Venture capitalists are people that have a lot of experience in investing in young firms and helping them grow. So they often bring expertise in terms of advice on the board. They take a board seat. They help find senior staff for the company. Finding people is one of the key issues for these high growth firms as they're trying to grow. And so this is very important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize it's not just about the money, but it's also about the help that you get, particularly from angel investors and venture capitalists.
Yeah, and I guess one of the big questions, Karen, is that European companies, European corporations, not just the smaller ones, but also the bigger ones, seem to be falling behind relative to global competitors. More and more Chinese corporations enter the market. US corporations are much bigger, the big ones, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, all those corporations are US-based corporations. Whereas in Europe, we are really quite weak in terms of new but big and growing firms. So it appears to me that global market structures are really changing, Europe falling behind relative to other parts in the world. So Karen, what's your assessment of how Europe relative to other important places in the world is doing?
Well, Guntram, there are many drivers of change in the global markets, globalization, of course, being one of them, but also technology is playing a very important role. The internet, big data. I think we haven't seen the full implications of all of this yet. Certainly we see through technology the change in the way that people interact, also the change in the way that products are conceptualized and the way they're brought to market, the way people consume. So there are a lot of changes out there, and I think that some of these other regions, Asia, North America, even Latin America, and Africa as well, are innovating, are taking new approaches. If we look at the mobile phone in Africa and the way they're really thinking out of the box and approaching things differently. Europe needs to have a bit more of that mentality as well and be willing to move away from the things that worked in the past and get over this inertia and be willing to recognize that change is needed and to be able to keep up and innovate and try to find new approaches to some of these challenges that Europe is facing.